Welcome back to the show. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Phillips. And this is Crosstalk on TalkTV. On TV, on radio, online and on your smart speaker. Now, the Met have apologised for not being able to respond quickly enough when pro-Palestinian protesters scaled a war memorial following Parliament's vote against a ceasefire in Gaza last night.
The footage shows, as you can see, flag-waving protesters climbing on the Royal Artillery Memorial at Hyde Park Corner, which was covered with poppy wreaths from Remembrance Weekend. But Met Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley says there wasn't anything illegal happening.
It is not illegal to climb onto a statue. I think that might be something that government may consider, but that's for them to decide, not for me. The officer recognised that whilst it wasn't illegal, it was sort of it was unfortunately inflammatory in certain ways. The officers at the scene asked them to get down, and they did.
Still with us in the studio now is the Sun's political columnist, Trevor Kavanagh. Trevor, we're also going to show you some footage in a little while of a Palestine mob trying to attack the cenotaph last night. So two of our most sacred war memorials last night were kind of under assault from more pro-Palestinian protesters. And all we ever get from the police, this is what we got every weekend, is we're just looking for clarification on the law. You and I were just talking to well-known former copper Peter Blexley, who just said, look, if a copper suspects that the law may be being broken, that there could be a breach of peace here, they can arrest. The police just don't seem to want to arrest these people who are attacking our sacred war memorials. What the hell is going on?
But the interesting thing about Sir Mark Rowley's comments there is that he actually gave the justification for an arrest, which was that this was inflammatory. In his words, yeah. Inflammatory surely is sufficient for a breach of the peace offence. Yeah. And a breach of the peace can be ideal for a quick action by police to deal with an incident on the ground without any need for other resources. You have to ask yourself how quickly the police would have acted if instead of a Palestinian flag, someone had been waving the Union Jack.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that this is a very newfangled thing with the police. I don't think I've ever heard the head of the police before saying, oh, well, we don't know what the law is, or there's no law that exists that enables us to act. I mean, do you think the same? Is this some sort of recent development that's entered policing?
Yes, I'm afraid that in that short clip you've already shown, they have vindicated everything that Suella Braverman levelled at them in that article in the Times, that they are partisan, that they are deliberately soft peddling against particularly any large numbers or from a political vantage point. So when it comes to Palestinians, they can do almost as they please and are only arrested if there's photographic evidence which can be pursued subsequently. When it comes to the EDL thugs, they're onto them straight away. In fact, they meet them halfway before they've even got beyond Hyde Park. Yeah. So there are two sides to this story, and Mark Rowley is clearly on one of them. I
think it was maybe last weekend, one weekend before, but there's been an absolute handful of arrests of pro-Palestinian marchers. They think one weekend, about 100,000 marched through London, 9 arrests last weekend. And we're not in any way supporting the EDL or anything like that, but they turn up, 126 arrests. I mean, there it is. There is a kind of favouritism,
of course.
Yeah, well, joining us too is Andy No, who took some of that video, I think, of the protesters on the war memorials. I mean, you were an eyewitness. You've been very active, actually, going down to the protest, seeing what's going on, documenting it, and frankly, giving the world an eye on what's happening. What sort of things have you been witnessing?
I do observe what appears to be different types of policing responses depending on who is there to demonstrate. So the announcement to surround the Parliament was made through flyers, but still when people came, they were able to shut down the streets in Westminster where the drivers were. And then as soon as they were done, then they were allowed, escorted by police throughout central London, where then they went on to confront some drivers. I witnessed somebody hitting a car, throwing items at people, an elderly couple within a car, and shutting down the iconic streets in central London, and then climbing on this police this war memorial.
So you saw, you also, I think, filmed some people around the cenotaph. Let's have a look at some of your brilliantly filmed footage.
Where are your people? Wake up! One section is
Yeah, so Andy, there they are all trying to attack the cenotaph. The police, in fairness, at least nominally trying to stop them. In other scenes we've seen around the country, last night, in fact, we saw coppers just sort of standing there watching people climb all these statues. Quite extraordinary. And I've been to 3 of these demonstrations, and I must say, that they're full of hate for Israel, but they're not particularly menacing at the weekends. Yeah, 300,000 people on Saturday. I went to have a look at that. You don't feel frightened, but that looks a bit frightening around the cenotaph last night.
Well, we have now more than a month of these protests that have been happening, and what I'm observing is they are becoming a bit more entrenched and becoming essentially routine. It's happening not just on the weekends, but weekdays too. But some protesters are feeling emboldened to push a little bit further than what they could from the previous week or the week before. And I think it's important to point out that not everybody there is aggressive or violent, but there are some people who are taking advantage of the anarchy that's been allowed to become routine in central London on some nights.
Sorry, Alex, I was just going to say, you've seen these protests, right? As I say, I've taken the trouble to take a look at them myself. And the one thing that is striking is there's a lot of free Palestine, from the river to the sea, when will Palestine be free? A lot of tremendous anti-Israel sentiment. But what you don't hear much of is ceasefire or release the hostages. And as you're indicating, Andy, these protests are escalating, aren't they? We've got trouble here. The police have got to do something, wouldn't you say?
So some of the chants that people are familiar with in English are the nicer ones that in previous weeks where I've recorded that have been in Arabic have been explicitly anti-Semitic, where they don't mention Israelis and mention specifically Yahud or Jews. I did not observe that last night, but I have in previous weeks and I've recorded it.
Yeah, I mean, you've written extensively on divisions in society in America. You've written about Antifa. You've written about hardened sort of cause within activism and protest groups that have, I mean, when you look over at some of the videos coming from the States, it's even worse than here. You had, Muslim organizations screaming dreadful things through loudspeakers, calling intifada and the like. Do you think that we're beginning to import that sort of division in society here?
Yes, and I witnessed it last night. There was a recycling of the BLM chants and slogans. If we don't get it, shut it down, and no justice, no peace. So they're using a playbook that was very violent from several years ago in America, and hoping to have it take root here and to grow and to radicalize people. Most of the people on the streets last night at these demonstrations are young people. Youth and adolescents or young adults.
I mean, Trevor, listening to that and also discussing for the fact that the police aren't acting on things, perhaps in an even-handed manner, and Andy suggesting that, as weeks go by, people are becoming emboldened. Do you think it's about time government or the authorities stepped in and realised that if things aren't courts hold of now, nipped in the bud, that we could be looking at an increasingly divided society, and that's frankly dangerous?
It's very dangerous, and I think that the time has already passed when they should have stepped in. And one of the words that Andy used, which I think is absolutely appropriate here, is anarchy. The police have lost control. It's not a question of losing control. They have no control, and because they've shown no authority over these demonstrators, some of them are Islamists and some of them are Hamas, and even the gullible idiots who follow them in many cases, not all, I accept that many of them are appalled by the scenes of horror and violence in Israel, but they are being swept along with the Socialist Workers' Party, the Hamas political demonstrations. And the police are allowing this to happen and to escalate. And what we're going to see this weekend, allegedly, is 150 demonstrations across the whole of the country, which will paralyze the capital city and the major cities of this country.
Interesting that Extinction Rebellion are now getting involved. Greta Thunberg, their mask is slipping. Climate change is just a mechanism by which they protest about absolutely everything. Try to sum up, just before you go, Trevor, it's great to have you on board. Thanks for being with us. Try to sum up the disgust that I think millions of Brits will feel about our sacred war memorials being abused like this.
Well, I think this is a whole poisonous brew that's developing, and some of it's to do with immigration, because an awful lot of these protests are involving people not from Palestine but from the Indian subcontinent, and many of them are Islamists, and all Islamists are Muslim, whether you like it or not. This is the problem that...
Can I point out something I witnessed last night?
Just want to say, the swathe of the British public at large are utterly disgusted with the scenes that are being played out on their television screens and in their streets and their neighbourhoods every week now.
We've got to wrap really soon, very quickly.
So jumping on that, some of the chants, in addition to the political statements, were the Islamic faith creed being shouted on bullhorns, as well as Allahu Akbar. So there's a religious radicalising element in addition to the political aspect.
Very worrying, very worrying.
Both, thank you. We've run out of time, sadly.
Thank you, Andy.
Coming up after the break, Labour disunity deepens.